Okay, so Aram, thank you for joining my office hours. So today's topic is the Palo Alto Police Chief selection. So I think most people have heard that our current police chief is retiring, and there's currently a process to hire a new police chief. And so Aram, welcome. Sorry, welcome to my office hours. Aram, I don't know if you could just quickly introduce yourself and then introduce the topic.
Sure, I'm Aram James. I'm a retired public defender. I grew up in Palo Alto. I'm 73 years of age. I spent the bulk of my career as a public defender, as a line public defender, cross-examining and examining police officers every single day almost of that career. And of course, I have looked at police culture from a insider's perspective. As my clients depended upon me to make certain that I was not letting police officers lie in the courtroom. And if so, I needed to bring that to the attention of the court, the jury, et cetera, et cetera. So I retired in 2004. Since then, I have become an advocate for best police practices in Palo Alto. It's been sometimes very controversial. In 2005, I was criticizing the then city manager, Frank Benest, for failing to rein in the police chief at that time, a person by the name of Lynn Johnson, for racial acts against citizens, racially disproportionate acts against Black and brown people in this community. The police were called into the chambers that night, apparently to try to chill my First Amendment advocacy regarding this issue. And then, as you know, the just retired Human Relations Department person, Ms. Partula, we went back to the same thing. There was an effort, from my perspective, to chill my advocacy because I've been very, very determined that the city manager who does the hiring of the police chief, and the city manager, of course, is Ed Chicata, very nice man, but we do not agree on policy. And I've never been able to get him to sit down with me. And he had a listening, a series of listening sessions starting in March. The first session was in front of our Human Relations Commission. Coloma Smith, who's the chair of that, asked that the process, because we're 2 years post the George Floyd police execution. And you remember that we had rallies in the city of Palo Alto and all the way across the country and protesting the way that the police acted in that case and demanding at a local level that we have more transparency. And here's the great opportunity for the citizens to have input. And Ed Chicata, the city manager, decided to have a quote unquote blue ribbon commission do the interviews. And they were done this last week on Wednesday and Thursday. So that part of the process is over. Greg, that even though the the city manager hires the candidate ultimately that's going to be the next police chief, you all, meaning the city council, has to approve that selection. Mm-hmm. So actually the city council could say, look, Mr. Chicata, if you don't have an open process, we're simply not going to approve the next candidate or the next chief. And I don't know whether the city council's up to doing that. I would want them to do it, as one of the constituents of the city council members. I'd want them to say, we want to see the 3 finalists and we want to ask them questions about the issues that were being raised during the George Floyd period. And that would be about, are police going to be obligated in Palo Alto to intervene if they see a George Floyd-like situation? Are officers going to be disciplined if they don't intervene? Are the citizens going to have a right to intervene if they see the police are not doing that in a given situation? We've had a lot of controversy during Robert Johnson's tenure. Right now, Andrew Binder, the assistant chief, is now taken over the duties of the police chief. He's the acting police chief until the selection occurs. And I'm on a very good terms with Andrew. We've talked many times, coffee shops, et cetera, et cetera. I was sort of on the opposite end with our retiring chief, where we never spoke, and that was a shame. But so anyway, there's issues that that came up about encryption, canines, body-worn cameras, obligation to intervene, all of these very specific police practices that I think are critical. And if we don't have an opportunity, my sense was, Greg, that you all are very well suited. When people apply for slots on the Human Relations Commission or the Planning Commission, Art Commission, the City Council routinely interviews the candidates in public, knows how to cross-examine and bring out important information as to whether they're going to be candidates. And there's no more important position in any city than the police chief, because the leadership, the culture of a particular police department is going to be in large part determined by the quality of the police chief's leadership, and then what kind of training the officers are going to be given. So I think it's incumbent that the City Council have an opportunity to interview the 3 finalists, and also members of the community have an opportunity to interview the 3 candidates. And there's precedent in the city of Palo Alto. In 2009, ultimately Dennis Burns was selected as the chief. He was the chief, was in the department for many years, and he was the chief right before Robert Johnson. And we pushed then city manager James Keene to give us the name of the 3 finalists, and he did that. So there's precedent for doing this. I wasn't completely happy with the process in 2009 because the 3 candidates were never brought before the City Council for you all to ask questions, but we, the citizens, were able to do our own independent research through the internet to just determine what the 3 candidates look like, what their past was. And you know, Greg, from having studied this subject, sometimes when we don't fully vet candidates, what happens? We get somebody that's not the best fit for the city of Palo Alto. I'm going to stop talking now and take questions. You can ask Greg, whoever wants to do that. I would say that I've written a lot of articles. I just had, and I sent it to you, an interaction with the mayor. Mayor was concerned that there's been, quote unquote, a wave of police officers that want to depart Palo Alto and go to the city of Santa Clara. So, you know, I've been doing this for 15 years now. So I'll shut up here.
Okay, well, Aram, thank you for being involved. I know you're really steeped on the selection process. I don't know if you could give kind of a quick nutshell of what the process is like now, at least from your perspective, and how you want the process to look like instead.
As I understand, the candidates that were selected to be interviewed were interviewed by this quote unquote blue ribbon commission of citizens. It included former police officers, members from the religious community, the business community, a cross-section of so-called blue ribbon citizens. But that was done behind closed doors, okay? And I strongly believed that not only should interested citizens like myself be able to ask questions, but people who have been brutalized or alleged to have been brutalized by the Palo Alto Police Department, who've believed that they've been the victim of racial profiling, were intimidated by the police, or maybe they had good interactions with the police, and they want to ask questions based on those sets of experience. But Ed, despite my one-person campaign, I know there was others interested, has basically refused. And like I said, the Human Relations Commission asked the same thing. Let's make it a public process. That's what the public was demanding. And I kind of wrote this, recent piece dated June 6th. And at the end I said I'm not going to read the entire article. 2 years after the police execution of George Floyd, and Mr. Shikata, you still haven't received the memo. The public doesn't trust their police and demands transparency in all matters related to police practices, including the hiring of our next chief. It's time the city council fire Ed Shikata. Well, that's not the important part. The important part is that he's still there as our city manager. He hasn't opened up the process. And there's a quote that you've probably heard me refer to it. It's a case in California case law. It's a case from 1996, Bradbury versus Superior Court. And there they said, quote, law enforcement officers carry upon their shoulders the cloak of authority to enforce the law the laws of the state. In order to maintain trust in its police department, the public must be kept fully informed of the activities of its police officers. I might add to that quote, there's no member of government or cities that can do more harm quickly to citizens than police officers. We know that often there's unarmed people that are shot by the police, sometimes justified, sometimes not. But we want to make sure from the very top of our department to the bottom, all of the officers, that we're part of that process, that we're not afraid of their union, that we get to know the officers, that sort of thing. So I don't know. I'm open to questions, of course.
Okay, great. So thank you for making that distinction between the two. I actually have asked the city manager about this. Right? I asked him, so, because in general, you're probably also aware that I'm also not just on the police issue, but in all issues, I want to push for more transparency whenever possible. Just because I think, sunlight is probably the best disinfectant in terms of issues. And this particular issue, when I asked the city manager about being more transparent, right, like letting us know who the candidates are, his pushback is that we're not going to be able to get quality candidates because quality candidates don't want people to know that they're looking for a new job, and so they'll be discouraged from applying. And what's your thoughts about that counter argument?
I think it's a fallacious argument. I think it's out of the city manager playbook. They always give that same answer. And I talked with a local member of the press who runs the editorial board, and I've talked to other people, including police officers. If I'm applying for a job to be the next police chief, the first thing I'm going to want to do is get letters from my own chief to say, hey, Greg Tanaka has been great. I mean, he knows police practices inside and out. He would be a great leader.
Yeah.
And that happens all the time. And the city that might lose somebody to another city is going to be proud that somebody from their department is now the chief of another town because they were well trained in Palo Alto. Mm-hmm. So that's just the stock answer that they give. I know, when I applied to be the public defender for Santa Clara County, didn't get that job. I wanted letters from other attorneys, from other people to say, hey, Aram does a great job as a public defender. Now there's an opportunity. So no, I don't. That's just a stock answer to avoid the public having an opportunity to weigh in on who's going to be our next police chief. So sure. I don't agree with Mr. Shikata on that at all.
Well, actually, I tend to agree with you on this one because I think even for our own police officers, when they apply to work at other cities, I think they actually let us know, right? So we actually know, like we're told by staff that, oh, there's this many officers who may be transferring to these other departments. So I think we actually know ahead of time as well. So it was kind of, at least to me, it's kind of bizarre because if we know when our employees are looking for jobs in other police departments, it works the other way too, right? I would assume.
Exactly.
I don't know. So,
and I think it was interesting in the press. He said, "Oh, I'm not going to go along with the suggestion of the Human Relations Commission. I'm going to go along with what Terry Black, who's a hired consultant, on hiring people for executive positions in the city." Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute. You had these listening sessions from the public, and you just totally disregarded the most important part of the process. Yeah. Let us be able to ask the three candidates, the three finalists, what they think about these important issues, and let us have input. Ed Shikata would still have the ultimate choice, but and as Coloma Smith from the HRC said, you're actually protecting yourself, Mr. Shikata, because if the public got to participate in the selection process of the next chief, and that next chief turned out to be a poor fit for the city of Palo Alto, the blame kind of gets shared, right? Yeah. It's not just the decision that had been made by Ed. The citizens had input, and we all kind of were let down by what happened in terms of the chief that was ultimately hired.
Yeah. Well, the second reason why the city manager said that he didn't want to do this was because the police chief does not report directly to the city council, and that it's the prerogative of the city manager to hire people that work for him, and not for the city council to, I guess, in some ways, micromanage the city manager on this.
Well, you're not micromanaging. You're making a decision for your constituents, the 7 members of the council,
Mhm.
at a critical time in this country where people are questioning police culture altogether. And we keep seeing it over and over again. And so you're not micromanaging. You're saying, Mr. Shikata, we hired you, okay, and we oversee you, and we can fire you if we choose. And in this situation, we are strongly advising you that you open this hiring process up to public scrutiny, including, I mean, look, you're somebody who on the council that routinely probably asks the most questions. And sometimes they get irritated with you, just like the judges got irritated because when I represented clients, it went on for days. You're doing your job.
Well, to me, it's like, why do we serve, right? And, you know, I think you can serve where you just want to get along and not make anyone angry or mad at you. But I feel like you're not necessarily doing your job, right? It's okay to get people angry at you because, you know, we're like the last line of defense for the public, right? If we don't ask the hard questions, who will? So I think
I totally agree. It's like a public defender. I tell the judge, look, judge, I understand you have other cases on your calendar, but that's not my problem. My problem is to represent this client as long as it takes to make sure they get due process. Same thing for you. You're, like you said, trying to make sure the community gets due process on this important decision.
Yeah. So, so those were the two major. And you know, he pointed me to the city code that says the city manager can hire who he feels like it, right? So I said, okay. So definitely there wasn't a lot of interest in opening up the process. But you know, the thing that was interesting though is that some cities actually directly elect the police chief. Right?
Santa Clara does.
Yep. And then the other thing that's interesting is that some cities, the city council directly appoints the police chief. And so
in some cities, the city council appoints?
Yeah, appoints the police chief directly. So, so you know, I do wonder whether this is an important enough role that maybe the city council should appoint the police chief directly, or perhaps even just be elected role. Perhaps, I don't know. But I guess in general, I think I'm trying to think of the downside of having a more open process. And I'm hard pressed to understand the downsides because I know the point of, well, no one qualified is going to apply, but I just don't think that's true, just given the process we have of employees leaving our city, going to other cities, right? So that just doesn't seem to hold water to me. And then, you know, at a time when there's a lot of concern, right, about the police department, it just seems like having a more open, transparent process is going to be
it's a win-win situation for Ed Shikata would look like he's a transparent guy, even though in my experience, not so much. But for the citizens, it would be a win situation. And for the council as well, because you would directly be able to ask questions along with citizens of the 3 finalists. And ultimately, Ed gets to make that choice. But I do believe, here's the question I have for you. Mm-hmm. If the city council ultimately has to approve his choice, mm-hmm. is that all 7 council members? Is it?
I don't think so. I think just majority. But you know, I think typically, right, for most cases, as you know, most city council members, unless they feel super passionate, will just go along, right? So
I agree.
Yeah,
go along to get along, right?
Yeah, but for me, you know me. Well, if I think it's wrong, if it's going to ruffle a few feathers, I'll vote no on it, right? But I think most of my colleagues will not do that.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. You're a persuasive gentleman, and I believe that even if you fail in it, I would love it if you would make an effort to get your colleagues to agree that at a minimum, the 3 finalists come in. They've talked, during the Black Lives Matter conversation, We had so much concern, apparently, from city council members about policing in this country. Why would they not want to take this opportunity at all times in our country when the trust between citizens and police is the lowest probably it's ever been, maybe except for the 60s, okay? Why not say, come on, ladies and gentlemen on the city council, let's do our job. We've preached all these things about police reform for the last 2 years. We have a so-called independent police auditor. You all looked at the policies and procedures for the last 2 years. So it's not like you all are ignorant about police practices and don't know what questions to ask. I think you're particularly well suited to lead that conversation, Greg, because you're a great dissenter. You know, it's like with the Supreme Court, as you know, sometimes the dissents become the majority opinion down the road. We just saw an example of that in this country, didn't we, this week?
Sure. Yeah, I want to I assume there's no public questions or comments on this. So, Yuksun, do you have any questions or comments on this topic?
Yeah, so I want to go back to what Mr. James mentioned about using an informal power, like refusing to approve an appointment to push for those names being released. Evidently back in 2009, that was similar to what happened as citizens pressured the city manager to release the names. But even then, citizens had to individually vet the candidates. So what type of information would concerned residents like to see released about candidates, whether during an interview or otherwise?
Well, so that's a very, very good question. And I think the answer is that young people like yourself would have questions, a whole series of questions about what kind of law enforcement they want in their town, whether the police chief is going to be a leader on making sure that we don't have racially discriminatory law enforcement, that we put safety as an important issue, but at the same time, constitutional policing. We want the police to act within the Constitution when they're contacting citizens. We don't want extrajudicial behavior. We've had enough of that in Palo Alto, where police have been brutalized, canines sent on sleeping individuals, and we only discovered that after the fact because somebody other than the police released surveillance videos. So we have enough really important issues just in our own town that those are the kind of questions we want to know. How would you handle body-worn camera footage? Are you going to hold it back, or are you going to be transparent and release it to the citizens so we can be part of the determination as to whether the police have acted correctly and whether or not the so-called suspect was the one that provoked the incident? I'm not, so that's a critical thing. Encryption. I don't know if you followed the issue, but I bet you have. It's so critical. We've had in Palo Alto, they decided unilaterally, the city manager and the police chief, Ed Chicata and Robert Johnson, all of a sudden one day in 2021 decided, hey, we're encrypting the radio transmission so the press and citizen activists aren't going to have access to that. No discussion. 70, 80, 90 years in this country, we've had radio transmissions open to the press and the public, particularly important so in real time, we can find out what the police are up to. Not 3 or 4 or 5 days later by an email or a public relations person giving a scripted answer to the citizens. So that's a really important area that we need to ask our next chief about. I mentioned to Mr. Tanaka in our conversation, we have a huge problem in this country of police officers seeing their fellow police officers engaged in misconduct, but there's been this code of silence traditionally. And so officers beat the hell out of somebody and then nobody tells. And now there's obligations under current legislation to say, no, you're gonna have an obligation to intervene when you see another officer engaged in misconduct of any sort. And if you fail to do that, you're going to also be responsible. The consequences that accrue to the officer that did the bad act is going to apply to you as well. So it's kind of, those are the kind of questions that I would start with. There's a whole litany of questions that people have that they'd want to ask. If they've come from another department, what's their record like been there? Are they all, do they have a history of calling out their fellow officer when they've acted badly, or they've never complained about a fellow officer in the past? I mean, those are, what is your position on tasers?
We have another office hours coming up.
Sure.
So any last wrap-up thoughts before we end today's session?
I'd like to hear from the citizens out there rather than just me talking.
Okay, well, what happens typically is we post this video, Inez is going to write a quick summary to go along with this live stream, and typically there's content come afterwards. So there's a handful of people who actually watch it during during the office hours, but then there's a lot of people who voice their opinions later. So
well, I commend you because this is a controversial subject. And I'm not surprised that the response that you got from Mr. Shikata was, hey, look, mind your own business. Don't try to micromanage me. It's my obligation to do this. And I don't care whether the citizens want an open process. I'm calling the shots. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. And that to me is not the way we need to run city government. And I hope that you push hard, because Mr. Shikata will not meet with me. It's not going to happen. And I think I have a lot to offer him, having been a public defender for 25 years, dealt in the courtroom with police every single day during my career. And the last 15 years, all pro bono, worked with the independent police auditor. I speak, as you know, Greg, almost weekly on police practices issues. I have a lot to offer, even if it's something that the city manager doesn't want to hear.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining our office hours, and have a great evening. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you, Greg.